Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, members of the Swedish Academy, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who have some knowledge of your present speaker, as revealed by the loftier-minded sections of the British press, will be resigning yourselves to a half-hour of unrelieved gloom. Indeed, your first view of me, white-bearded and ancient, may have turned that gloom into profound dark amid the blaze of noon, irrecoverably dark, total eclipse. But the case is not as hard as that. I am among the older of the Nobel Laureates, and therefore might well be excused a touch of, let me mutter the word, frivolity. And do not misunderstand me. I have no dancing girls, alas. I shall not sing to you or juggle or clown, or shall I juggle? I wonder. How can a man who has been defined as a pessimist indulge in anything as frivolous as juggling? You see, it is hard enough at any age to address as learned a gathering as this. The very thought induces a certain solemnity. Then again, what about the dignity of age? There is, they say, no fool like an old fool. Well, there is no fool like a middle-aged fool either. 25 years ago, I accepted the label pessimist thoughtlessly, without realizing that it was going to be tied to my coattails, as it were, something in the way that, to take an example from another art, Rachmaninoff's famous prelude in C-sharp minor was tied to him. No audience would allow him off the concert platform until he played it. Similarly, critics have invariably dug into my books until they could come up with something satisfactorily hopeless. I can't think why. I don't feel hopeless myself. Indeed, I tried to reverse the process by explaining myself. Under some critical interrogation, I named myself a universal pessimist, but a cosmic optimist. I should have thought that anyone with an ear for language would understand that I was allowing more connotation than denotation to the word cosmic, though in derivation, of course, universal and cosmic mean the same thing. I meant that when I consider a universe which the scientist constructs by a set of rules which stipulate that his constructs must be repeatable and identical, then I am pessimistic and bow down before the great god entropy. I am optimistic when I consider the spiritual dimension which the scientist's discipline forces him to ignore. So worldwide is the fame of the Nobel Prize that people have taken to quoting from my works, and I do not see why I should not join in this fashionable pastime. 20 years ago, I tried to put the difference between the two kinds of experience in the mind of one of my characters, and I made a mess of it. He was in prison. All day long, the trains run on rails, eclipses are predictable, penicillin cures pneumonia, and the atom splits to order. All day long, year in, year out, the daylight explanation drives back the mystery and reveals a reality usable, understandable, and detached. The scalpel and the microscope fail. The oscilloscope moves closer to behavior. But then, on the other hand, all day long, action is weighed in the balance and found not opportune nor fortunate, nor ill-advised, but good or evil. For this mode, which we call the spirit, breathes through the universe and does not touch it. Touches only the dark things held prisoner incommunicado, touches, sentences, and passes on. Both worlds are real. There is no bridge. What amuses me is the thought that, of course, there is a bridge, and that if anything it has been thrust out from the side that least expected it, and thrust out since those words were written. For we know now that the universe had a beginning. Indeed, as an aside, I might say we always did know. I offer you a simple proof and forbid you to examine it closely. If there was no beginning, then infinite time has already passed, and we could never have got to the moment where we are. We also know, or it is at least scientifically respectable, to postulate that at the center of a black hole the laws of nature no longer apply. Since most scientists are just a bit religious, and most religious are seldom wholly unscientific, we find man himself now in a comical position. His scientific intellect believes in the possibility of miracles inside a black hole, while his religious intellect believes in them outside it. Both, in fact, now believe in miracles. Credimus quia absurdum est. Glory be to God in the highest. You will get no reductive pessimism from me. A greater danger facing you is that an ancient schoolmaster may be carried away and forget he is not addressing a class of pupils. A man in his 70s may be tempted to think that he has seen it all and knows it all. He may think that mere length of years is a guarantee of wisdom and a permit for the issuing of admonition and advice. Poor young Shakespeare and Beethoven, he thinks, dead in their youth at a mere 52 or 3. What could young fellows such as that know about anything? But at midnight, perhaps, when the clock strikes and another year has passed, he may occasionally brood on the disadvantages of age rather than the advantages. He may regard more thoughtfully a sentence which has been called the poetry of the fact, a sentence that one of those young fellows stumbled across accidentally, as it were, since he was never old enough to have worked the thing out through sheer living. Men, he wrote, must endure their going hence, even as their coming hither. Such a consideration may modify the essential jollity of an old man's nature. Is the old man right to be so happy? Is there not something unbecoming in his cheerful view of his own end? The words of another English poet seem to rebuke him. King David and King Solomon led merry, merry lives, with many, many lady friends and many, many wives. But when old age crept over them with many, many qualms, King Solomon wrote the Proverbs and King David wrote the Psalms. Powerful stuff, that, there's no doubt about it. But even so, there are two views of the matter. I've put these two views down. Since I've quoted to you some of my prose, which is generally regarded as poetic, I will now quote to you some of my goon or McGonagall poetry, which may well be regarded as prosaic. Sophocles, the eminent Athenian, gave us his final opinion that death of love in the breast was like escape from a wild beast. What better word could you get? He was 80 when he said that. But Ninon de L'Enclos, when asked the same question, said no. She was uncommonly matey at 80. Evidently, age need not wither us, nor custom stale our infinite variety. Let us be for a while not serious, but considerate. I myself face another danger. I do not speak in a small tribal language, as it might be one of the 600 languages of Nigeria. Of course, the value of any language is incalculable. Your Laureate of 1979, the Greek poet Elitis, made quite clear that the relative value of works of literature is not to be decided by counting heads. It is, I think, the greatest tribute we can pay your committees that they have consistently sought for value in a work without heeding how many people can or cannot read it. The young poet John Keats spoke of Greek poets who died content on pleasant sward, leaving great verse unto a little clan. Indeed, and indeed, small can be beautiful. To quote yet another poet, prose writer though I am, you will have begun to realize where my heart is. Ben Jonson said, "It is..." The top of page 5. "It is not growing like a tree in bulk doth make man better be, or standing long an oak 300 year, to fall a log at last, dry, bald, and sere. A lily of a day is fairer far in May. Although it fall and die that night, it was the flower and plant of light. In small proportions we just beauties see, and in short measures life may perfect be." My own language, English, I believe to have a store of poets, of writers, that need not fear comparison with those of any other language, ancient or modern. But today that language may suffer from too wide a use rather than too narrow a one, maybe an oak rather than a lily. It spreads right round the world. It is the medium of advertisement, navigation, science, negotiation, conference. 100 political parties have it daily in their mouths. Perhaps a language subjected to such strains as that may become here and there just a little thin. In England, a man may think he is addressing in English, a man may think he is addressing a small, distinguished audience, or his family, or his friends perhaps. He is brooding aloud maybe, or talking in his sleep. Later he finds that without meaning to, he has been addressing a large segment of the world. That is a daunting thought. It is true that this year, surrounded and outnumbered as I am by American laureates, I do take a quiet pleasure in the consideration that though variants of my mother tongue may be spoken by a greater number of people than are to be found in an island off the west coast of Europe, nevertheless they are speaking dialects of what is still centrally English. Personally, I cannot tell whether those many dialects are being rendered mutually incomprehensible by distance faster than they are being unified by television and satellites. But at the moment it is true to say that an English writer faces immediate comprehension or partial comprehension by a good part of 1 billion people. His critics are limited in number only by the number of the people who can read his work, nor can he ever escape from knowing the worst. No matter how obscure the publication that has disemboweled him, some kind correspondent, let us call him X, sends the whole article along together with an indignant assurance that he, X himself, does not agree with a word of it. I think apprehensively of the mark I present, once a moving target, now surely a fixed one, before the serried ranks of those who can shoot at me if they choose. Even my most famous and distinguished fellow laureate and fellow countryman, Winston Churchill, did not escape. You remember a critic remarked with acid wit of his getting the award, was it for his poetry or his prose? Indeed, it was considerations such as these which have given me, I suppose, more difficulty in conceiving, let alone writing this lecture, than any piece of comparable length since those distant days when I wrote set essays on set subjects at school. The only difference I can find is that today I write at a larger desk, and the marks I shall get for my performance will be more widely reported. Now, when, you may say, is the man going to say something about the subject which is allowed to be his own? He should be talking about the novel. Well, I will for a while, but only for a while, and as it were tangentially. The truth is that though each of the subjects for which the prizes are awarded has its own and unique importance, none can exist wholly to itself. Even the novel, if it climbs into an ivory tower, will find no audience except those with ivory towers of their own. I used to think that the outlook for the novel was poor. Let me quote myself again. I speak of boy growing up, not exceptional boy, but average boy. Boys do not evaluate a book. They divide books into categories. There are sexy books, war books, westerns, travel books, science fiction. A boy will accept anything from a section he knows rather than risk another sort. He has to have the label on the bottle to know it is the mixture as before. You must put his detective story in a green paperback, or he may suffer the hardship of reading a book in which nobody gets murdered at all. I'm thinking of the plodders, the amiable majority of us, not particularly intelligent or gifted, well-disposed, but left high and dry among a mass of undigested facts with scraps of saleable technology. What chance has literature for competing with the defined categories of entertainment which are laid on for them at every hour of the day? I do not see how literature is to be for them anything but simple, repetitive, and a stopgap for when there are no westerns on the television. They will have a far less brutish life than their 19th century ancestors, no doubt. They will believe less and fear less. But just as bad money drives out good, so inferior culture drives out superior. With any capacity to make value judgments vitiated or undeveloped, what mass future is there then for poetry, for belles lettres, for real fearlessness in the theatre, for the novel which tries to look at life anew, in a word, for intransigence? I wrote that some 20 years ago, and I believe that the process, as far as the novel is concerned, has developed but not improved. The categories are more and more defined. Competition from other media is fiercer still. Well, after all, the novel has no built-in claim on immortality. Story, of course, is a different matter. We like to hear of succession of events, and as an inspection of our press will demonstrate, have only a marginal interest in whether the succession of events is minutely true or not. Like the late Mr. Sam Goldwyn, who wanted a story which began with an earthquake and worked up to a climax, we like a good lead-in, but have most pleasure in a succession of events with a satisfactory midpoint, end point. Most simply and directly, when children holler and yell because of some infant tragedy or tedium, at once when we take them on our knee and begin shouting, if necessary, "Once upon a time," they fall silent and attentive. Story will always be with us. But story in a physical book, in a sentence, what the West means by a novel, what of that? Certainly, if the form fails, let it go. We have enough complications in life, in art, in literature, without preserving dead forms fossilized, without cluttering ourselves with Byzantine sterilities. Yes, in that case, let the novel go. But what goes with it? Surely something of profound importance to the human spirit. A novel ensures that we can look before and after, take action at whatever pace we choose, read again and again, skip and go back. The story in a book is humble and serviceable, available, friendly. It is not switched on and off, but taken up and put down. It lasts a lifetime. Put simply, the novel stands between us and the hardening concept of statistical man. There is no other medium in which we can live for so long and so intimately with a character. That is the service a novel renders. It performs no less an act than the rescue and the preservation of the individuality and dignity of the single being, be it man, woman, or child. No other art, I claim, can so thread in and out of a single mind and body, so live another life. It does ensure that at the very least a human being shall be seen to be more than just 1/billionth of 1 billion. I spoke of the ivory tower and the unique importance of each of our studies. Now I must add, having said my bit about the novel, that these studies converge literature with the rest. Put bluntly, we face two problems. Either we blow ourselves off the face of the earth, or we degrade the fertility of the earth bit by bit until we have ruined it. Does it take a writer of fiction to bring you the cold comfort of pointing out that the problems are mutually exclusive? The one problem, the instant catastrophe, is not to be dealt with here. It would be irresponsible of me to turn this platform into a stage for acting out some anti-atomic harangue, and equally irresponsible at this juncture in history for me to ignore our perils. You know them as well as I do, and as so often when the unspeakable is to be spoken, the unthinkable thought, it is Shakespeare we must turn to, and I can only quote Hamlet with the skull. Not one now to mock your own grinning, quite chop-fallen. Now get you to my lady's chamber, tell her let her paint an inch thick, to this favour she must come. Make her laugh at that. I'm being rather unfair to the lady perhaps, for there will be skulls of all shapes and sizes and sexes. I speak tangentially. No other quotation gives the dirt of it all. It's another kind of poetry of the fact. I must say something of this danger. I have said it, for I could do no less. Now, as far as this matter is concerned, I have done. The other danger is the more difficult to combat. To quote another laureate, our race may end not with a bang, but a whimper. It must be nearer 70 years ago than 60 that I first discovered and engaged myself to a magic place. This was on the west coast of my country. It was on the seashore among rocks. I early became acquainted with the wonderful interplay of earth and sun and moon, enjoying them at the same time as I was assured that you could not have action influenced at a distance. There was a particular phase of the moon at which the tide sank more than usually far down and revealed to me a small recess which I remember as a cavern. There was plenty of life of one sort or another around all the rocks and in the pools among them, but this pool farthest down, and revealed, it seemed, by an influence from the sky only once or twice during the time when I had the holiday privilege of living near it, this last recess, before the even more mysterious deep sea, had strange inhabitants which I have found nowhere else. I can remember and even feel, but not really describe, the peculiar engagement, excitement, and not sympathy or empathy, but passionate recognition of a living thing in all its secrecy and strangeness. It was, or rather they were, real as I was. It was as if the center of our universe were there for my eyes to reach at like hands, and to seize on by sight. Only a hand's breadth away, in the last few inches of still water, they flowered, grey, green, and purple, palpably alive, a discovery, a meeting, more than an interest or pleasure. They were life. We together were life itself, until the first ripples of returning water blurred and hid them. When the summer holidays were over and I went back again, about as far from the sea as you can get in England, I carried with me like a private treasure the memory of that cave. In some strange way I took the cave with me, and its creatures too that flowered so strangely. In nights of sleeplessness and fear of the supernatural, I would work out the phase of the moon, returning in thought to the slither and clamber among the weeds and the rocks. There were times when, though I was far away, I found myself before the cavern, watching the moon dazzle as the water sank, and I was comforted somehow by the magic of our common world. I have been back since. The recess, for now it seems no more than that, is still there, and at low water springs, if you can bend down far enough, you can still look inside. Nothing lives there anymore. It is all very clean now, ironically so, clean sand, clean water, clean rock. Where the living creatures once clung, they have worn 2 holes like the orbits of eyes, so that you might well sentimentalize yourself into the fancy that you are looking at a skull. No life. Was it a natural process? Was it fuel oil? Was it sewage or chemicals more deadly that killed my childhood's bit of magic and mystery? I cannot tell, and it does not matter. What matters is that this is only one tiny example among millions of how we are impoverishing the only planet we have to live on. Well now, what has literature to say to that? We have computers and satellites. We have ingenuities of craft that can land a complex machine on a distant planet and get reports back and so on. You know it all as well, better than I. Literature has words only. Surely a tool as primitive as the flint axe or even the soft copper chisel with which man first carved his own likeness in stone. That tool makes a poor showing, one would think, among the products of the silicon chip. But remember Churchill, for despite the cynical critic, he got the Nobel Prize neither for poetry nor prose. He got it for about a single page of simple sentences which are neither poetry nor prose, but for what, I repeat, has been called finally the poetry of the fact. He got it for those passionate utterances which were the very stuff of human courage and defiance. Those of us who lived through those times know that Churchill's poetry of the fact changed history. Perhaps then the soft copper chisel is not so poor a tool after all. Words may, through the devotion, the skill, the passion, and the luck of writers, prove to be the most powerful things in the world. They may move men to speak to each other, because some of those words somewhere express not just what the writer is thinking, but what a huge segment of the world is thinking. They may allow man to speak to man, the man in the street to speak to his fellow, until a ripple becomes a tide running through every nation of common sense, of simple, healthy caution, a tide that rulers and negotiators cannot ignore, so that nation does at last truly speak unto nation. Then there is hope that we may learn to be temperate, provident, taking no more from nature's treasury than is our due. It may be by books, stories, poetry, lectures, we who have the ear of mankind can move man a little nearer the perilous safety of a warless, unprovident world. It cannot be done by the mechanical constructs of overt propaganda. I cannot do it myself, cannot now create stories which would help to make men aware of what they are doing. But there are others who can, many others. There always have been. We need more humanity, more care, more love. There are those who expect a political system to produce that, others who expect the love to produce the system. My own faith is that the truth of the future lies between the two, and we shall behave humanly and a bit humanely, stumbling along, haphazardly generous and gallant, foolishly and meanly wise, until the rape of our planet is seen to be the preposterous folly that it is. For we are a marvel of creation. I think in particular of one of the most extraordinary women, dead now these 500 years, Juliana of Norwich. She was caught up in the Spirit and shown a thing that might lie in the palm of her hand and in the bigness of a nut. She was told it was the world. She was told of the strange and wonderful and awful things that would happen there. And at the last, a voice told her that all things should be well, all manner of things should be well, and all things should be very well. Now we, if not in the Spirit, have at least been caught up to see our earth, our mother, Gaia Mater, set like a jewel in space. We have no excuse now for supposing her riches inexhaustible, nor the area we have to live on limitless because unbounded. We are the children of that great blue-white jewel. Through our mother, we are part of the solar system and part through that of the whole universe. In the blazing poetry of the fact, we are children of the stars. I better come down, I think. Churchill, Juliana of Norwich, let alone Ben Jonson and Shakespeare, Lord, what company we keep. Reputations grow and dwindle, the brightest of laurels fade. That very practical man, Julius Caesar, whom I always think of for a reason you may guess at as Field Marshal Lord Caesar, Julius Caesar is said to have worn a laurel wreath to conceal his baldness. While it may be proper to praise the idea of a laureate, the man himself may very well remember what his laurels will hide, and that not only baldness. In a sentence, he must remember not to take himself with unbecoming seriousness. Fortunately, some spirit or other, I do not presume to put a name to it, ensured that I should remember my smallness in the scheme of things. The very day after I learned that I was the Laureate for Literature for 1983, I drove into a country town and parked my car where I should not. I only left the car for a few minutes, but when I came back, there was a ticket taped to the window. A traffic warden, a lady of a military aspect, stood by the car. She pointed to a notice on the wall. "Can't you read?" she said. Sheepishly, I got into my car and drove very slowly round the corner. There on the pavement, I saw two county policemen. I stopped opposite them and took my parking ticket out of its plastic envelope. They crossed the road to me. I asked if, as I had pressing business, I could go straight to the town hall and pay my fine on the spot. "No, sir," said the senior policeman, "I'm afraid you can't do that." He smiled the fond smile that such policemen reserve for those people who are clearly harmless if a bit silly. He indicated a rectangle on the ticket which had the words, "Name and address of sender," printed above it. "You write your name and address in that place," he said. "You make out a cheque for £10, making it payable to the clerk, to the justices, at this address written here. Then you write the same address on the outside of the envelope. You stick a sixpenny stamp in the top right-hand corner of the envelope and post it, and may we congratulate you on winning the Nobel Prize for Literature."